Most people picture the Amalekites as a savage people who materialized from nowhere in the desert, faceless, generic enemies of Israel with no backstory and no origin. The truth is something else entirely. They were cousins, blood of the same blood as Abraham, direct descendants from the lineage of Jacob's twin brother. This is the story no one told you. Put into perspective what that actually means. The people who received the sentence of total annihilation, declared in Exodus 17 and sealed in Deuteronomy 25, were not strangers from distant lands. They were family. And the origin of that enmity begins with a woman whose name most people have never heard, a concubine named Timnah, and ends more than 1,000 years later with a man named Haman attempting to exterminate every Jew in the Persian Empire in a single day. The threads are connected, and the biblical record shows exactly how. Consider the historical situation that defines everything. Isaac had 2 twin sons, Esau, the firstborn, hairy and a hunter; Jacob, the second, who bought the birthright for a bowl of lentils and then stole his father's blessing disguised in goatskin. Esau swore to kill his brother. Jacob fled to Paddan Aram, where he remained 20 years serving Laban. When he returned, the two apparently reconciled, as recorded in Genesis 33, with Esau running to meet his brother, embracing him and weeping on his neck. But the wound never healed at depth. Each went his own way. The descendants of Esau settled in the mountains of Seir, south of the Dead Sea, and founded the nation of the Edomites. The descendants of Jacob descended into Egypt and became Israel. Esau had 5 sons recorded in Genesis 36. The firstborn was named Eliphaz, and here enters the piece that would alter the history of Israel for more than 1,000 years. Eliphaz took a concubine named Timnah, and from her was born a son named Amalek. The biblical text is surgical in this detail. Genesis 36, verse 12, records the lineage with legal precision. Timnah was the concubine of Eliphaz, son of Esau, and she bore Amalek. She was not a lawful wife. She was second category, a woman without the full status of a matriarch, and her son would carry that mark of origin forever. Consider who Timnah was. In Genesis 36, verse 22, she appears again, now identified as the sister of Lotan, daughter of the Horites Seir. The Horites were the original people who inhabited that region before the Edomites moved in and took over. Timnah was of defeated Horite nobility. When the sons of Esau dominated those mountains, she passed from the house of a sovereign family into the condition of a concubine to a foreign lord. Later Jewish records, preserved in ancient treatises, recount that she had first asked to be converted and accepted as a legitimate wife into the lineage of the Hebrew patriarchs, and had been rejected by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Humiliated, she accepted becoming the concubine of Eliphaz, saying she preferred to be a servant of that family than a princess of another. Whether history or interpretive tradition, the point stands. Timnah entered the story of Israel through the back door, and from her came the eternal enemy, silence. The seed of resentment had been planted, and it would grow for generations until it exploded on a battlefield called Rephidim. Follow the process by which the Amalekite people took shape. They were not Edomites in the proper sense. They were a lateral branch, descendants of a line considered inferior within Esau's own genealogy. For that reason, they separated early from the main house and migrated south into the region that today encompasses the Negev, the Sinai Peninsula, and northern Arabia. They became nomads. They learned to survive in the most hostile deserts of the known world, in temperatures that exceeded 50 degrees Celsius during the day and plunged below zero at night. They mastered the use of the dromedary centuries before other peoples of the region. They knew every well, every wadi, every cave between Egypt and the Euphrates. They were, in essence, the absolute lords of the desert trade routes. And it was precisely because they dominated those routes that they became a logistical nightmare for every caravan, every migrating people, every army on the march. On the surface, they were impoverished nomads. Beneath that surface, they controlled more transit wealth than many of the sedentary kingdoms of the period. Grasp the magnitude of what happens in Exodus 17. Israel has just come out of Egypt, approximately 600,000 men of military age, plus women, children, the elderly and livestock, totaling a crowd estimated at between 2 million and 2.5 million people. They crossed the Red Sea. They walked 3 days without water. They complained at Marah. They received the manna in Sin. They camped at Rephidim, where Moses struck the rock at Horeb and brought forth water. And it was at that exact moment of extreme exhaustion, with the people tired, thirsty, scattered along the edges of the camp, that the Amalekites attacked. It was not an honorable frontal battle. Deuteronomy 25, verse 18, records the tactic with devastating precision. The Amalekites came from behind and killed the weakest, the stragglers, the exhausted, the sick, the children who could not keep pace with the march. They attacked those who could not fight back. They cut through the multitude at its most fragile link. Witness the scene. Imagine a family that has been walking for weeks through the desert, with the mother carrying an infant in her arms, the father supporting an elderly person, 3 small children trying to hold the pace. They fall behind the main body of the crowd. The dust from the march ahead slowly thins, the sun hammers down overhead, and suddenly, from nowhere, riders on dromedaries appear, armed with short, curved blades and sinew bows. In minutes, that family ceases to exist. And it is not just one family. It is hundreds, perhaps thousands, scattered across the rear of a human column, stretching for kilometers through the desert. The outrage was immediate. Moses ordered Joshua to choose men and fight Amalek the following day. He climbed to the top of the hill with Aaron and Hur. He lifted the staff of God in his hands, and as long as his arms were held up, Israel prevailed. When his arms grew tired and dropped, Amalek gained the advantage. Aaron and Hur had him sit on a stone and held up Moses' arms until sunset. Israel won. But the military victory was only the beginning of the consequence. The system held for centuries. The curse did too. Shortly after the battle, Exodus 17, verse 14, records a declaration that would change Israel's relationship with Amalek forever. God commanded that this be written in a book as a memorial and spoken aloud in the hearing of Joshua. The statement was categorical. The memory of Amalek would be utterly blotted out from under heaven, and more than that, there would be war from the Lord against Amalek from generation to generation. This was not an ordinary rivalry. It was a theological sentence, an eternal decree grounded in a single principle. Those who attack the weak from behind when they are exhausted do not deserve to exist as a nation. Notice what happens 40 years later. Israel is now on the edge of entering Canaan. Moses delivers his final address in Deuteronomy, and among all the instructions left to the nation, he reserves chapter 25, verses 17 through 19, for one specific and singular command. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you came out of Egypt. Remember how he attacked you from behind. Remember the weak he killed when you were tired and worn down. And when the Lord your God gives you rest from all your enemies on every side, in the land he is giving you as an inheritance, blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Consider the weight of that command. Israel received hundreds of detailed commandments in its law, but only one people received a sentence of complete extermination written by name, inscribed in a book, and repeated from generation to generation. The Amalekites, the children of the son of the concubine of Eliphaz, grandson of Esau, great-great-nephew of Jacob, a family enmity transformed into a cosmic decree. And that command remained suspended for nearly 400 years, waiting to be carried out. Think about the context that followed. During the period of the Judges, the Amalekites continued to torment Israel. Judges 3 verse 13 shows that they allied with Eglon, king of Moab, to oppress Israel for 18 years. Judges 6 verse 3 records that they invaded alongside Midianites and peoples of the east, destroying crops, carrying off sheep, oxen and donkeys, leaving the land devastated from Egypt to Gaza for 7 consecutive years. Israel reached a state of extreme misery. Farmers hid their grain in wine presses to protect it. Families lived in caves carved into the mountains. It was against this backdrop of systematic Amalekite raiding that Gideon was called to deliver Israel. But even Gideon's victory over the Midianites and Amalekites, in the battle where he reduced his army from 32,000 to just 300 men, did not fulfill the ancient decree. It was containment, not extermination. The fulfillment was reserved for the first king, but the most brutal work had not even begun. Consider what happens in 1 Samuel 15. Samuel comes to Saul with a direct order from God. The words are heavy, aware of the antiquity of the decree. Go and strike Amalek. Destroy everything he has, man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Spare nothing. The order nearly repeats Deuteronomy 25 word for word. The moment that 3.5 centuries had waited for was arriving. Saul gathered the army, 200,000 men from Israel plus 10,000 from Judah, according to the biblical text. He marched to the city of the Amalekites. He warned the Canaanites, a friendly people descended from Moses' father-in-law, to withdraw before the battle. And he struck Amalek from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt, a military campaign spanning hundreds of kilometers across the desert. And here enters the moment that would define Saul's destiny forever. Follow what he did. He captured Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive. He spared the best of the sheep, the cattle, the fat animals, the lambs, and everything that was good. He destroyed only what was despised and worthless. He broke the order at 2 critical points. He spared the king, and he spared the finest spoils. When Samuel arrived and confronted him, Saul claimed he had kept the animals to sacrifice to God at Gilgal. Samuel answered with the phrase that echoes to this day, "To obey is better than sacrifice," and Saul lost the kingdom in that moment. Samuel had Agag brought to him. The Amalekite king walked in delicately, perhaps expecting to be spared. Samuel took a sword and hacked him to pieces before the Lord at Gilgal. The fulfillment of the ancient decree passed through the hands of a prophet, not a king. And still it remained incomplete, because some escaped, grasped the consequence of partial disobedience. Not long after, David, still fleeing from Saul, had taken refuge among the Philistines at Ziklag. While he was away from the city, the Amalekites attacked, burned everything to the ground, and took all the women, sons, and daughters as captives. 1 Samuel 30, verse 1, records the event with brutal economy. David pursued the attackers with 600 men. 300 fell out along the way, exhausted at the Besor ravine, without strength even to cross the water. David pushed on with the other 300. He found an Egyptian servant abandoned by the Amalekites, starving after 3 days and 3 nights, left to die in the desert because he had fallen sick. He revived him with bread, water, a cluster of dried figs, and 2 clusters of raisins. The Egyptian guided David to the Amalekite camp. The scene that follows is cinematic. The Amalekites were spread across the desert, eating, drinking, and dancing, celebrating the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and the land of Judah. David attacked from twilight until the afternoon of the following day. 24 hours of unbroken combat across the desert. He recovered everything: women, sons, daughters, possessions, livestock. Not one person was missing. Only 400 young Amalekites escaped, mounted on swift dromedaries. 400, it was enough. because the story of the Amalekites would not end with David, or with Saul, or with the judges. It would continue for another 500 years, waiting for the final act. Consider the setting of the Babylonian exile and the Persian return. Israel had already been destroyed as the northern kingdom, carried off by the Assyrians in 722 before Christ. Judah had been taken by the Babylonians in 586 before Christ. 70 years later, under the permission of Cyrus, the Jews began returning. But many remained scattered throughout the vast Persian Empire, especially in its administrative capital, Susa. It was there, in the palace of Ahasuerus, known in secular history as Xerxes I, that the final recorded act of the enmity between Israel and the children of Amalek would play out. The man's name was Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and that patronymic is not an ornamental detail. Examine the specifics. Esther 3 verse 1 identifies Haman as an Agagite, meaning a descendant of Agag, the Amalekite king spared by Saul and killed by Samuel 500 years earlier. The 400 who fled before David had reproduced. They had migrated, they had spread across the east, and one bloodline had survived long enough to produce a man who would become second in command of the greatest empire on earth. Haman had risen to be prime minister of Ahasuerus, governing over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. And when Mordecai, a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, a descendant of the same Kish who was Saul's father, refused to bow down before him, Haman decided not only to kill Mordecai, but to exterminate every Jew in the entire empire on a single day. The historical symmetry is staggering. A descendant of Saul refusing to honor a descendant of Agag, a vengeance waiting 500 years to attempt to complete itself in reverse. Haman wanted to do to the Jews what Saul had failed to do to the Amalekites. Total annihilation. And he paid Ahasuerus 10,000 talents of silver for the right to execute the decree. Something between 300 and 400 metric tons of silver, a fortune equivalent to nearly 2/3 of the Persian Empire's annual revenue during that period. But the most brutal work had not even begun, because history reversed itself. Esther, Mordecai's cousin, a Jew hidden in the royal harem, had become queen of the empire. She revealed her identity. She exposed the plot across 2 banquets prepared with calm and strategy. Haman was hanged on a gallows 25 meters tall that he himself had ordered built for Mordecai. His 10 sons were killed on the appointed day, and the Jews received authorization to defend themselves in all the provinces. They killed 75,000 enemies throughout the empire. The fulfillment of the ancient decree passed through the hands of an exiled queen 2,000 kilometers from Jerusalem. And yet, even with Haman dead, even with his sons executed, Jewish tradition records that the memory of Amalek would continue to resurface in various historical forms until the end of time. The rabbis identified successive enemies of the Jewish people as functional reincarnations of the Amalekite spirit, not as genetic descent, but as a continuity of purpose, to attack Israel at its most fragile points, to aim at the children, the exhausted, the stragglers of history. Notice what survived and what was lost. As an identifiable people, the Amalekites vanished from the documented historical record. There are no modern Bedouin tribes that claim that descent. There are no archaeological monuments bearing inscriptions in the Amalekite language. There are no excavated cities carrying that name confirmed by secure epigraphic evidence. They were, in archaeological terms, effectively erased. The decree fulfilled itself in the slow erosion of the centuries, not only in the edge of the swords of Saul or David, but their story remained. In Exodus, in Deuteronomy, in Judges, in 1 Samuel, in 1 Chronicles, in Esther. and in all the annual readings that Judaism continues to this day, in which the name of Amalek is pronounced alongside a ritual noise that covers it, so that its memory may be blotted out and yet never forgotten. A theological contradiction carrying nearly 4,000 years of unbroken history. The seed planted by a Horite concubine named Timnah produced a nation that endured for more than 1,000 years as the sworn enemy of the people of Israel. From her came the attacks in the desert. From her came the raids in the time of the judges. From her came the battles of Saul and David, and from her too came the final attempt at genocide in Susa, all of it from a single unresolved family lineage in the 19th century before Christ. Think about how everything closes. The Amalekites did not come from nowhere. They came from the same root as Israel. Children of Esau, grandchildren of Isaac, great-grandchildren of Abraham. They carried the same blood as the patriarch, yet chose, generation after generation, the road of resentment against the brother. Their story is the story of what happens when a family enmity is cultivated for centuries without genuine reconciliation. What began with a bowl of lentils and a stolen blessing in the tent of Isaac ended with 75,000 dead across the Persian Empire nearly 1,500 years later. And what those people never saw, never heard, and never knew they were building was the biblical paradigm of the eternal enemy. Not the distant foreigner, not the powerful empire, not the organized army, but the desert cousin who attacks from behind when everyone is exhausted. The lesson that crossed the millennia does not speak only about them. It speaks about all of us. The most devastating enemies rarely come from the distant horizon. They come from the same soil, the same family, the same unresolved history. And when the memory of an ancient offense finds no cure, it transforms itself into destiny.